This is part 2, the second video in the series of making a model of this locomotive and its carriage extension on the end. This is Great Southern and Western Railway of Ireland's loco number 92 with this extension piece at the end here, and so its sister locomotive number 90 is the one that I'm redoing for Trainz railway simulator, and then at the same time I want to make a model of this one, number 92, with that carriage extension. And I've only got photographs to work from, so it's really just to explain the process that I do in order to achieve this. So my first move was to produce the wheels. So let's go into Gmax. Here we are, and so there's that photograph, one of those photographs that I'm using. And if I just bring that up to full size, and you can see here that I've made the wheel sets. That's the two 10-spoke wheels, pairs of wheels, and they're to gauge, 5'3" gauge, and I've still got to work out how the whole bogie assembly comes together. I can see springs in there, I can see the axle boxes, but the actual frame itself is still a little bit difficult to find. And you'll see that I've got into this, which is just for making the carriage section. I've brought in some panels from the locomotive, that's the side panel there and the end panel, and I've also brought in a Great Southern and Western, a scan of a plan, the only one I've got, of a Great Southern and Western covered wagon. And the reason I did that is because I wanted the routine width, the standard width for a GS&WR piece of rolling stock, because I can see from the photographs that it extends either side of the rear of the locomotive. So that's why that then gave me the basic dimensions, and then estimating it from photograph I took the curve of the roof, and that gave me a spline outline. So I was creating a rectangle and then altering it so as to fit the cross section of the roof that I wanted. Also, of course, what I had to do was to create the tumblehome, which is the inward curve of the lower part of the carriage side, and this is very much a characteristic of railway carriages right the way through to, well, almost to the mid 20th century. Some were still running, and certainly in Ireland. So my next stage from this, so those are the two, you can see they're the two wheel sets, and I will be explaining how I animate and position those in a future video. So I'll come to that, but it's basically the modelling is going to be the subject of these first few videos about this. So what did I do? Well, I took it into a side view here, and using the rectangle, and you can see in a rectangle you can adjust the corner radius, of course, length and width, and I think you can just about make out there the yellow on that photograph, on top of the photograph. So that I was using that as a general guide, and obviously it's pixelated. If I correct the texture, it doesn't really do a lot more for me. It's still heavily pixelated, and in fact the actual size of it, I've got to allow for, although this is a side view of the vehicle, the actual side view, the direct 90-degree on would be in the middle of the photograph, where the photographer was standing looking straight at the vehicle, and then you get this distortion, I suppose, is because you're getting it's not a three-quarter view, but it's an angled view of the end of the carriage. So essentially what I did is I estimated the overall width, and I created, if I just hide this, this is what I produced. So those that's just my outline, using the covered wagon as a broad guide for the overall width, so it doesn't really relate. So it's butted hard up against the end of the locomotive, and this then is the outline of the carriage, and it's the carriage moulding that I wanted to get right. And because although I could just put a texture over it, I could create the tumblehome without this mold and just have the lining as the moulding. I wanted the moulding just to give it that extra bit of depth. It just gives I think the model a bit more character, a bit more of interest. So if we look at the way in which I've done those, in fact what I can do is I'll just pick that up. I think that's the whole, maybe it's not. I think they're all still ungrouped. Yeah, all it. But you can see here that what I've done is I've created all those shapes, those rectangular shapes, just as in 2D, or not, well, initially in 2D, and then I had to curve it for the tumblehome. And doing the tumblehome can be really, really difficult. Look at that. That's all the different curves that I managed to bring in, and it does need tidying up after that, because you want to get a consistent curve, and yet I find that one of the most difficult and challenging aspects of creating moulding in a tumblehome, wrapping it on the curve of the tumblehome, because you're working with a number of points. If we go into this one, you'll see what I'm talking about here, and there's the editable spline vertex, and you can see I've got a series of points there which relate to how the curve, and we've got those handles there to create the curve, how the curve is going to be created. And what's really important when you're doing this is to make sure that you have that the vertices on the outer frame coincide with the vertices on the moulding as much as possible. So what I do is I take the actual height of these, so that is, for example, 3 foot 6.241. I make a note of all these, and then I reproduce those on the outer frame, so we get a 3 foot 6.241 there. So hopefully I can reproduce on these splines which create the moulding, and on the outer frame the same curve. Now obviously looking at that curve there, if I zoom right in, you'll see it's like tram lines, it's all over the place, but I will come on to correct that. So that was my first stage. So I then, to create the lining out, I then took a screenshot. I hid everything else, so the wheels and the cab side and anything else, the cab end, that was sort of in the way. The blue, by the way, because these are the windows, so that's the window frame between that, and that's really important, because when you come to make you're going to make two extrusions from this, one with just the moulding on and one with the rest of the carriage side. In other words, it's going to be the outer piece here plus the two blue pieces, which if I then move that, I'll just copy it, that's going to be the main bulk of the side, and then this is going to make the mouldings. You'll see as I go on. Just delete that. So what did I do? Well, I took a photograph there, took a screenshot of that and imported it into a little drawing program. I use a very old one called Freehand, Macromedia Freehand, which I think it must be about 20 years old now at the least. And here, if I just put the background on, that's what I imported into Freehand, and that was going to be my guide. So the first thing I did then was to make sure I had the colours sorted that I needed, and it's Crimson Lake is the background colour, so I actually used LMS Crimson Lake, which by taking a sample comes out at 78 red, green, blue, 78, 35, 21, and then a gold colour or yellow colour 242, 203, 46, and then I wanted a slightly darker version of that as well, about a 10% darker, so that this Crimson Lake comes down, dark Crimson Lake if you like, 47, 15, 7. So building up each layer, the first thing I did was I put in a whole series of guides to allow me to draw all of the shapes that I needed. So if I just bring in the foreground there, this is one of the shapes that I drew, and it's filled with the that gold color. Well, if I and the stroke, the outer stroke, which usually changes its overall dimension, I eliminated that. But if I put the stroke in as black and I just increase the size of it, that's what I was drawing. So I was drawing that, and that gave me the outline to then bring in the color that I needed. And the reason I filled all that in is because, of course, when I put it onto this texture on top of the moulding comes just inside. Let's just lose that stroke. The moulding comes just inside there, so you just see the little bit between the edge of the moulding and, let's zoom in, you would see it between the edge of the moulding and that little bit. So you just get a thin bit of lining shown, and all this space is chopped away when you put this onto the mesh, and that's why inside these spaces I can use it for blocks of colour, which you can see here. So I exported this into, well, first of all let's see the rest of it. The other layer that I put in is of course the background, which is the Crimson Lake, and I put in a block of Crimson Lake there and darker Crimson Lake here, and actually I added another colour in there for the interior of the carriages, so that I can reuse this texture for a variety of parts of the mesh. It's not just for the carriage side, because once it's been loaded, then you might as well keep on reusing it. And in fact, what I'll aim to do is to use this, I'll keep adding to this texture in order to have it as the single texture. Now it does make a big texture, so let's go over to a paint program. I use Paint Shop Pro, and here is the, so I imported into this, see, it was a JPEG, wasn't it? So I brought into this one the carriage side lining. There it is. There's the screen grab, carriage side lining, and it's enormous as far as Trainz is concerned. A very, very big texture, 6,390 by 3,756 pixels. So it's very big indeed. So my first job was to reduce that down. Normally I would only go for an overall width of 512 pixels, but on this one, when I converted it to a TGA, which is the format that you need to use, I actually made it, it should be showing the other format now, the other size. I don't know why it's doing that. 6390, let's just close that a moment and just open it again. Sometimes Paint Shop Pro has its own little quirks. Cab side lining, there it is, 1024 by 512. No, that's not the one. That's the cab, isn't it? Carriage side lining. Oh, well, there we are. I didn't reduce it. I wonder why it was taking such a lot of space. So what I would do with this is 1024, and I don't want it to keep the same aspect ratio. I want it to be multiples, powers of 2, so 512. Okay, and there we are. It's still quite nice and smooth. So we just save that. And what sort of size does that now make? Still 1.5 meg, so I might reduce it further. I'll just have a quick look and see what it looks like at 512, and this time I can maintain the aspect ratio because it comes down to 256. It's not quite as nice as I would like, so I'm maybe just going to leave that at 1024. Okay, so that was then, and this you'll see I've added a block in there for the interior colour of the carriage, which I've just guessed. So that is then my texture, and I will add to that. I'll put in blocks of other colours, and the reason I can do that is because this area does not appear on the carriage side. Okay, let's go. So having made our texture, let's close those down and let's move this. I think it just needs to be moved out the way. Stick it over there and unhide everything. And you can see from this that the carriage side is now got its lining. There's still a few issues, and you can see that here. That's part of the tumblehome curve. That's that. If I go zoom in, you can see that little darkened piece. So I need to look in there. But what I've done is I created the lining out for the carriage side in two sections. The first section is the carriage side itself. So if I pull that back, then you'll see that's just a straightforward crimson lake, and all the other faces are the dark crimson lake. Okay, so let's just hide that. And then this one, and let's hide everything else. This one is now, because the mesh is chopping away all of that space there, it's only this bit that the texture is sitting on. Then I've got the lining out, it's sitting right on the edge of the mesh, and that's a 1-inch extrusion from those editable splines. There's still issues here, and if we have a look up here, this is where the tumblehome is. One thing I'm very pleased about is there are no doors on this tumblehome, because they are a pain. They really are difficult to do. You spend hours and hours and hours. And you can see here that I've been doing all sorts with this. I've created, there's the editable splines created and joined together. There they are, extruded for 1 inch. Then there's the texture first put on, and then I had to X-form the whole thing, and then go back to redo the texture. And eventually I'm going to collapse all that down, because at the moment it's some really, it's over 2,000 polys, so it's far too much. So I will reduce that. And then I went back into editable mesh, and if we look at the editable mesh here at the vertices and then zoom right in, not too bad there. There's a bit, you can see here, look, there's extra lines. Basically what I've got to do still is pick those up and gently move them over. And this is at the greatest magnification that you can do on GMAX. So essentially it's a compromise. I'm just trying to get everything more or less. You have to decide which is the one that you're going to end up with. So there's still a few hours work on that. Well, not hours, but certainly an hour's work. Just going around the, make sure I've got both of them. There's two there, or even more than two. So by just positioning them, and that's not the worst of them, I think. I think there's some right, yeah, look at that. My goodness. That needs still some more work done on it. But by doing that, what I'll do is I'll overcome the issues that you get with the texture on this bit. Actually, looking at that, there, we've obviously got too much here. So what I'll be doing with that is taking the mesh. Now this is not the tumblehome part. So essentially what I've got to do here is just, I think, extend that down. It should be moving. Oh, it's the wrong direction. No, it's not. That's not going to work. So I'm still got to get, because clearly, look, there's not there's mistakes there. Look, thickness, it's okay up here, I think, not too bad. Actually, looking at it, what I might be able to do is just adjust the, go in, so another go altering the face here, and annoys me that I'm just flicking using the mouse button there. Ah, for goodness sake, come on. So let's just make that quite a bit bigger. Just remind ourselves we've got a bit too much. So essentially what I need to do is to pull virtually all of this. I'll go to that spot and I'll zoom in up the top here. And the two lines that I'm looking at, this one and this one, there and there, so I just want to go in as far as I can. Let's pull that down a bit, make it even bigger. And then using that, I want to consume some of this space and increase some of this space. I think that's right, isn't it? No, it's the other way, isn't it? I want to bring that just down a tiny amount. I think there. Let's have a look at that. Yes, it's a bit better. It's not all there, but it's a bit better. So look up the top here. Yeah, getting there. Certainly going to be close enough, I think. And that's the other thing I found, is that you can get away with a bit of variation. So let's take that back over, close that down. So you can see there how and I've still got to work on that, but that then gives me the, I'll save that. I will save 2 copies. And let's have a look. And that gives us the beginnings of the, I shouldn't move that out of position, should I? So let's bring that over. Once I've got one side done, happily the other side is the same. So I don't need to worry too much about it. I can just copy this, swing it around, and extra effort to make sure it's show in the correct way, not inside out. Come on, just move it over a fraction. There we are. So we're getting close. I'm getting close to the side. Of course, it begs the question: what does the end look like? But I think it's going to look something. That lining there and that lining there, 2 different widths. So I've still got the adjustments to make sure I'm using that, getting that just right. It's worth the effort because it's going to end up looking really nice. And as you'll have seen from one of the comments in the first video, this was used by the Great Southern Railway, which is the amalgamated railways of the Irish Republic prior to CIE being formed. This was used for taking staff between Houston Station and the west of Dublin out to Inchicore Works and back. That seems to have been its final duties. So there we are. So I was just trying to do this to show you the aspects of getting a carriage side with mouldings with a tumble home. It's still not there. I think I'm about, you can see this strange, that doesn't always appear necessarily in Trainz, but there's definitely an issue there which I've got to sort out. If I swing it round, does it disappear? But that's the sort of complexity I find I'm doing for mouldings on tumble homes. The reason why I've got this, you'll see here, that's dark, that's the thickness of the moulding that we're looking at into there. So it's standing proud. There's the actual side of the carriage, there's the thickness of the moulding, and there's the outer face of the moulding. And that's why I decided to use some dark crimson lake, so that could do that. And then as far as this is concerned, this extra bit here, we're not right up the top here, got to get that sorted. Let's have a look here. Well, that's the distortion of the perspective view. Here it looks okay, because that's where the windows are. So we've got, it's not just tight up against the moulding, it's actually inset. That's the inner part of the side of the carriage sandwich, as it were. So you see, that's a technique that you can use for creating a moulding, or for these old 19th century vehicles. Very common indeed with the tumble home, and it's, as I say, it's well worth the effort, because the overall look is classically sort of Victorian, early 20th century, and really gives the atmosphere to the whole vehicle. So that's as far as I've got so far. I hope this video has been of interest, and if you have any questions or queries about the techniques which I'm using, then please don't hesitate to post a comment, question, whatever, and I'll aim to answer it either just with a comment back to you, or in a future video. So that's it for number 2. Do watch out for number 3, as I try to build up the carriage section a bit more, and the future part will be, in a future part I'll deal with the, as I say, the animation. I'll be actually going back to the locomotive to describe how I arrange everything on that. So that's the end of this video. I hope it's been of interest. Please do leave a comment, a thumbs up if you wish, and if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please do so. There's no obligation, it just encourages me to make more videos. So thank you very much, and look out for number 3.